despite the political crisis, some good things have still happened in this country, and one of them is definitely that we have more startups who have won.
Yes, Georgi, the Georgian Innovation and Technology Agency, GITA, has named 20 startups that have won the 100,000 lari co-funding grant program. Our readers on bm.g can find the detailed information about the winners, but the checkpoints talk to those from Silicon Valley who have coached the startups in Georgia to develop and then pitch their business ideas effectively. Our viewers can now meet USMAC CEO Alphredo Coppola and Women in Tech Program Director Peck in what seemed to me a very inspirational and heartening conversation. Welcome to the Checkpoints, and thank you for taking our questions. I'm really happy to see you in the studio. Haven't seen like foreign visitors for such a long time. So how is your travel to Georgia due to all these restrictions and pandemic and everything?
Well, I think we've been actually very fortunate that we've been able to move around fairly well, and getting in was relatively easy. We spent the weekend in Kaheti, which was spectacular, and we got an unexpected snow. The lockdown is a challenge, but thankfully we're staying at a hotel where there's a cafe in the hotel. Mm-hmm. So it's been easy for us to sort of stay contained as a unit.
When we talk of a pandemic, I mean, is it a challenge or is it an opportunity for startups particularly, and also for women, and especially for women in tech?
Definitely the month of April in 2020 was a big shock for everybody because we had to adjust to and understand what this pandemic was all about. But I think certainly in Silicon Valley by September and the remainder of the year, we had bounced back. So investors were still investing in a different way. Corporations were still doing business with startups, but in a different way. And naturally, because nobody is traveling, we're doing all of our conferences and our programs online. And I think that is working quite well. But in your question about how startups had to adjust, obviously certain sectors were very negatively hit, and some new opportunities emerged. Those in e-commerce and logistics, in the health and medical area. You know, there's different ways that the markets were impacted to the COVID.
Where do you think Georgia stands in that regard, comparing to other countries?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Georgia is in a greater disadvantage compared to other countries. And I would say, you know, the way the EU is behaving, in the way they're supporting their economies, I believe they're in a disadvantage. I believe Georgia is supported in different ways, and I think there's an opportunity for Georgian startups to take advantage of these unusual circumstances.
What do you mean under different ways?
Well, you know, to be really frank, I mean, a lot of the economical support comes from American sources, American donor agencies. And I think the way that they are dispersing funds is very different than the EU is dispersing funds.
You mean in terms of supporting what type of startups might be financed or granted the opportunity, right?
Exactly. I mean, we are very grateful to the partnership we have developed with the USAID Economic Security Program. They're funding the Georgian Women in Tech program that we are running. And I don't think this could have been funded as quickly if we were dealing with EU money, being very blunt.
Yeah, that's blunt and that's true. Also, Ms. Peck, what does the pandemic bring to women? We know that it's been a heavy burden on them, and every study, every research tells us that. But what about women, particularly in tech?
We had a panel last night with two women, one from Intuit and one from Unity, very high level. And because we're all working from home, and a lot of us are parents, it's been really interesting now for the family dynamic, whether it's, you know, the father was doing most of the work with the children or the mother, but now they're able to sort of blend that workload. And I think, you know, both sides have gotten to see what it is to really add the layer of taking care of your family. So I think moving forward, there's a real opportunity, and I think everyone has found really a new way to think about what's important to them in terms of lifestyle. And I think when you have a balanced lifestyle, you bring that to your work. And certainly for entrepreneurs, that will be the same.
What about particularly Georgian women in tech? Do you see potential here, and do you see this urge for them to have that type of skills of doing business?
Something that's really been interesting here that I've noticed is we've been coming here for about 2 years now, and this is the 4th program we've run. And the startups are typically very well balanced between men and women, which I think is a real credit to GITA in terms of the selection process. But they've gotten better and better and better. And so the other thing that's interesting is that there's not as much focus on whether it's a woman founder or a male founder. And interestingly, that's where we want to get to. We don't want to be having to talk about the gender conversation. We want to get to the point where it's perfectly normal to have either a female or a male CEO. And I think that that's where Georgia, because this ecosystem is young, that we're starting it with the right kind of ethos and ecosystem.
Since you mentioned that you're coming back for 2 years, almost 2 years, and now, what about the startups that you have coached before? Do you see them in business, or do you see them out of business? Because that's the specifics of startups.
So we've seen we've had a wonderful success story with a company called Fubber, who you may have heard.
Of course.
And they're just now moving into the Ukraine market. This is why we do this. And what's been interesting about this ecosystem building is that now they are mentors and they are an inspiration to other founders. And we were also very lucky last night. Normally, the awards of the matching grants happen after we have gone back to Silicon Valley, but we got to see, it's like we're watching our children, right? We got to see the winners last night, and there were a couple of them who we saw the last time around, and now their companies have been elevated. And in fact, a Georgian VC added 3 grants on top of the matching grants to 3 of the companies. So this is actually the next step, is not just bringing investors from outside of Georgia, but inspiring investment from within Georgia.
What about the uncertainty that the pandemic brings? Because investing in startups, and we know that grants are just the first phase for them, then they have to bring in the private capital. But what factor does this current uncertainty play for them?
In business, there are crises that come and go. And this one was a little bit different. But I think good entrepreneurs, they know how to thrive through the storm. And in a few months, they will figure out a different way of working. And that's what an entrepreneur is.
You mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that startups manage to adapt. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact that young startups faced was that they couldn't go to international conferences because those 3 or 4 day conferences were just the best way to meet lots of people in a short period of time. So we have seen some adaptations of some of the big name conferences like CES and TechCrunch Disrupt adapting to the virtual format. Some of them work well, some of them don't work so well, but we were also seeing new tools for networking that we have not seen before. So I think good entrepreneurs have to figure out a way to adapt to any changing market condition. And in fact, in some ways, it's a little bit easier. I know on our side, typically we run about 10 to 12 accelerator programs every year. Last year was a record. We did 23.
Because of no time, no place, nothing.
We didn't have to travel. Right? And it actually benefited the entrepreneurs a lot more because one of the important parts of our programs includes introductions to investors and introductions to corporations that could be customers. And it's a lot easier to reach these people now because they're not stuck in traffic, they're not on airplanes, they're just at the office. They're just in their homes. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you think some of that behavior will stay after pandemic ends?
I've already been to my very first, actually in December of last year, my first hybrid conference, and it was in Denver, Colorado, so it's relatively close to Silicon Valley. It was a short flight. There were about 150 people, actually there. Very, very high kind of, protection measures and way to measure, people's health. And then there were 2,500 that were participating virtually. And so I think we're going to start to see more of that. And it's really just a bit of experimentation right now, because it's not the way it was. And there is something to be said about meeting someone face to face and getting to interact with them at these events. So now it's a matter of finding that balance.
What are some of the tips or some of the tricks that that you have for coaching?
One of the main things that we teach in our coaching, which we have done this past session and what we do every cycle, is to help entrepreneurs to be customer centric. So talk more about in the voice of the customer as opposed to the voice of their product. And this is something that typically is like Silicon Valley startups, they just kind of know it second nature, so we take it for granted. But it's not just Georgian startups that face this challenge, it's everywhere around the world. We work in more than 40 countries, and it's a very, very consistent problem.
I think it's also just giving them an end-to-end understanding of what it takes to scale a company, and that it's okay to know what you don't know. And that sounds, a little bit crazy at first when you say, well, how can I know what I don't know? But what we do is we show them, these are the elements that it's going to take to scale. It's okay if you're weak in this area. No one expects you to know everything. But make sure that if that's a blind spot for you, that we can help you find someone to help you with that particular piece of the business and scale.
So to recap your visit and yesterday's award, the ceremony at GITA, what are main results for you personally, and where do you see the potential for growth?
I think it was interesting to see that the winners were a really broad swath in terms of the types of companies that won. So that's very heartening. The other thing that's very interesting is that many of the companies recognize that this market in the Georgian region and in the Caucasus region in general is a big market. And so starting here and testing process and testing product and testing your customer service here in this arena is a really great way to build a company before kind of attacking the global market. But we didn't really see one sector over another in terms of balance. It really is all kinds of solutions.
I'd like to add that having done this over 4 cycles now, we are seeing a trend in terms of sectors, heavy in e-commerce and also what we call environmental or sustainable solutions. And what's also interesting, again, from a Silicon Valley perspective, they were not groundbreaking technologies that we've never seen before, but they were groundbreaking for this region. And also they have done their homework. The startups have done their homework to say, let's figure it out in Georgia, and then we'll go to the neighboring countries where they also seem to be facing similar challenges. So I think that is a fabulous, new discovery for us, and I think investors are going to love that. That opportunity to invest in companies from Georgia that can scale within this region.
Thank you so much for this energetic and inspirational conversation. And my last point is how to put it, like on the side of the kind of like structural reforms for Georgia, because do you think the ecosystem without venture capitalists, without angel investors, without well-functioning capital markets is sustainable in the long term when we are speaking about access to finance, to say the least?
Really important question, and this is why we're committed to establishing a presence here. In fact, we're opening an office in Georgia starting in March, and my co-founder is going to be moving here full time. What we see is an opportunity to bring all the stakeholders together, because startups by themselves, of course, they need investment, but the ecosystem is relatively young. And what is a healthy ecosystem? It's where all the stakeholders are working in harmony. So that includes universities, corporations, the investment community, governments, and also governments and professional services organizations all have to be working together. So I think that's that's what we see evolving over the next 3 or 4 years.
Wonderful. And we've seen Angel Investor Club in Georgia. It's been established, Georgia's Angel Investor Club. This is like the first big step towards this, to building this type of ecosystem.
I agree. I think it's Alphredo, explained it, I think, very, very well. And I think also from the university level, we're starting to see them move from just traditional business, and they still teach traditional business, which is very important. But entrepreneurship is a very different type of business and mindset. And so we've seen all the universities here starting to add those types of programs to enable this type of thinking. The other thing that's really, really critical is to start to cross-pollinate the different groups within the university. So for example, computer science should be working with business. And even to a degree around education, because there's a lot of, within education that needs to happen. And entrepreneurship can start from middle school. And
Exactly.
We asked a question of the two women we were interviewing last night, are leaders born or are leaders made? And what we sort of found out was that both. So I would urge that it even move from the university system into grade school to start teaching this type of thinking and this entrepreneurial sort of business thinking in a very sort of lightweight way, but just so that opportunity is available to young people as they enter college and they start thinking about their careers.
Thank you so much for your interesting insights, and thank you for being with us and taking our questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are BMG. Follow and subscribe for business and economics news.